Something unexpected has just come to light, and if this message found you today, it may not be by chance. Somewhere, someone finally uncovered a hidden truth about this connection, a truth that explains why, no matter how much time has passed, no matter how many chapters have ended, and no matter how many attempts were made to move on, this bond never truly disappeared. Stay with me until the very end, because what is about to unfold isn't built on fantasy or coincidence. It begins with a quiet realization that has been growing in the background for much longer than anyone realized. There were moments that seemed meaningless at the time, conversations that felt ordinary, memories that appeared to fade, yet somehow they never completely left. Instead, they remained quietly beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to reveal their true significance. And now, someone has finally connected those forgotten pieces together. They noticed patterns that everyone else overlooked. They recognized emotions that never truly changed. Most importantly, they exposed the hidden reason why this connection kept finding its way back into both hearts, even when life seemed determined to pull everything apart. The more they looked, the clearer the truth became. What everyone believed was an ending was never actually an ending at all. It was only a pause before something much deeper could finally be understood. And the most surprising part is that this hidden reason was never about distance, timing, or unanswered words. It was about something far more powerful, something that has quietly shaped this entire journey from the very beginning. As this truth continues to unfold, you'll begin to understand why certain connections refuse to disappear, no matter how hard life tries to convince us that they should. And now listen carefully, because this is where everything begins to make sense. The person who exposed this hidden truth did not stumble upon it during a dramatic moment or through some extraordinary event. It happened quietly, almost unexpectedly, through a series of small realizations that refused to leave their mind. At first, they believed it was nothing more than passing curiosity. They thought perhaps old memories were simply resurfacing because of nostalgia. But the more they reflected, the more impossible it became to dismiss what they were feeling. Every memory seemed connected to another. Every unanswered question led to an even deeper realization. They began noticing that no matter how much time had passed, this connection continued, appearing in subtle ways, almost as though life itself refused to let it disappear. And that discovery unsettled them, because it challenged everything they had convinced themselves to believe. For so long, they told themselves the chapter had already closed. They believed that silence meant the story had ended. They believed that distance was proof that both hearts had finally moved on. Yet the evidence quietly suggested something completely different. The feelings had never truly vanished. They had simply become hidden beneath responsibilities, distractions, and the passing of time. But hidden does not mean gone. Sometimes the deepest emotions remain invisible until life becomes quiet enough for the heart to recognize them again. That is exactly what began happening. The more they slowed down, the more clearly they could hear the questions they had spent so long trying to silence. Why did certain memories still carry so much weight? Why did certain moments still feel unfinished? Why did one particular connection continue returning no matter how many new experiences life placed in front of them? They searched for logical explanations. Perhaps it was habit. Perhaps it was unfinished curiosity. Perhaps it was simply the mind holding on to something familiar. But every explanation felt incomplete, because none of them explained the emotions that still remained. Deep inside, they sensed there had to be another reason, a reason no one had ever spoken aloud. That is when everything started changing. Little by little, they began connecting pieces that once seemed unrelated. A conversation they had nearly forgotten suddenly carried new meaning. A moment that once felt ordinary now revealed hidden importance. Even the silence between them started looking different. Instead of seeing silence as absence, they began seeing it as something that had quietly protected emotions neither heart was fully prepared to understand. And the more they looked back, the more obvious the pattern became. Every attempt to walk away had somehow brought them back to the same emotional place. Every effort to forget had only buried the feelings deeper, never removing them completely. Time had changed many things, but it had never erased the impact this connection had left behind. That realization was impossible to ignore because genuine connections do not measure themselves by constant communication or perfect circumstances. They reveal their strength through what remains after everything else changes. The person who uncovered this truth finally understood that what survives distance often carries a deeper meaning than what only exists during easy seasons. Suddenly they realized they had mistaken quietness for closure, when in reality, quietness had simply been preparation. They had believed life was taking them away from this connection, yet perhaps life had been shaping them individually before bringing them face to face with truths they were not ready to accept before. That thought stayed with them for days. It returned during quiet evenings, during busy mornings, and during moments when they least expected it. No distraction lasted very long, because every road somehow led back to the same realization. This connection had never truly disappeared. It had only been waiting beneath the surface for someone willing to see beyond appearances. Then something happened that made this realization even more powerful. Someone finally spoke honestly about what everyone else had ignored. They pointed out the hidden reason this bond refused to fade, and once those words were spoken, nothing looked the same anymore. Suddenly, every unanswered question began moving toward an answer. Every confusing memory found its place, and every lingering emotion started making sense. But the greatest surprise was still ahead, because the truth that had finally been uncovered would soon force one heart to make a decision that could no longer be delayed. And that decision would change the way this entire connection was understood forever. And listen closely, because this is the moment the hidden reason finally begins to reveal itself. For the longest time, everyone believed this connection had simply become another memory, another chapter quietly left behind by time. Even the person carrying these emotions convinced themselves that what they felt would eventually disappear if they stayed busy long enough, focused on other responsibilities, or simply allowed enough months to pass. But something remarkable happened that changed everything. Someone who had been watching from a different perspective noticed a pattern that no one else had recognized. They saw that every time this connection seemed to fade, life somehow found a way to bring its presence back again. Sometimes it appeared through an unexpected memory, sometimes through a familiar place, sometimes through a simple conversation that stirred emotions thought to be long forgotten. It was never loud, it never demanded attention, yet it always returned, quietly reminding both hearts that something remained unfinished. At first, they dismissed these moments as coincidence, believing they were reading too deeply into ordinary events. But as those moments continued repeating, coincidence became harder to believe. The same emotions surfaced too consistently. The same questions returned too often. The same sense of familiarity refused to disappear. That was when the person who uncovered this truth finally understood something life had been trying to reveal all along. This connection had never been held together by perfect timing or ideal circumstances. It survived because it was rooted in something deeper than temporary emotions. It had become part of who they were, shaping their thoughts, changing their perspective, and quietly influencing decisions they didn't even realize were connected to this journey. That realization was both comforting and overwhelming, because it meant they could no longer blame distance, misunderstandings, or silence for what they continued feeling. They had spent years believing external circumstances kept this bond alive, when in reality, the strongest force had always existed within their own heart. And once they accepted that possibility, every unanswered question slowly began finding its place. They remembered conversations that once felt insignificant, but now carried hidden meaning. They remembered moments when they almost reached out but stopped, because fear convinced them it was safer to remain silent. They remembered opportunities that slipped away because uncertainty spoke louder than honesty. Looking back, they realized those weren't random events. They were crossroads, moments where fear quietly took control while truth waited patiently in the background. The hidden reason this connection never truly ended was becoming impossible to ignore because it was never built on constant communication alone. It was built on transformation. Every season of silence had changed them. Every disappointment had taught them something. Every unanswered question had forced them to grow in ways they never expected. Without realizing it, they had been preparing for a level of understanding they simply weren't ready to receive before. The person who exposed this truth explained something that immediately resonated with their heart. They said that some connections are not meant to remain exactly as they begin. Instead, they evolve through distance, through waiting, through personal growth, until both people are finally capable of recognizing the value that always existed beneath the surface. Those words stayed with them because they explained something no logical answer ever could. Suddenly, the years no longer looked wasted. The silence no longer looked meaningless. Even the painful moments began taking on a different purpose. Instead of seeing separation as proof that everything had failed, they began seeing it as preparation for a deeper understanding neither of them possessed before. And as this new perspective settled into their heart, another truth quietly emerged. They realized they had been protecting themselves from disappointment for so long that they had also been protecting themselves from honesty. Every excuse they created had been a shield against vulnerability. Every delay had been another attempt to avoid facing what already lived inside them. But the more they tried hiding from that truth, the stronger it became. It followed them into quiet evenings, appeared during ordinary moments, and gently reminded them that real emotions cannot remain buried forever. Eventually, the heart always asks to be heard. That realization changed everything, because for the first time, they stopped asking whether this connection still mattered. They already knew the answer. The only question left was whether they would continue pretending nothing had changed, or finally embrace the truth someone else had courageously exposed. And as they stood on the edge of that realization, they could feel another chapter quietly beginning, one that would require more courage than fear, more honesty than silence, and a decision that neither heart could postpone much longer. And now, listen carefully, because this is where everything reaches a turning point that neither heart can ignore any longer. After the hidden reason was finally brought into the light, something inside them began to shift in ways they never expected. They could no longer look at this connection through the same eyes they once had. What they once dismissed as lingering memories now appeared as undeniable reminders. What they once called coincidence now felt like a pattern, unfolding with remarkable consistency. They realized that every attempt to convince themselves the connection had ended only created another reason to think about it again. Every distraction eventually faded, but this bond somehow remained. That realization forced them to ask a question they had avoided for far too long. If this connection was truly meant to disappear, why had it survived every season of life? Why had it remained present through victories and disappointments, through new beginnings and painful endings, through moments of certainty and moments of complete confusion? The more honestly they searched for the answer, the more impossible it became to deny what their heart had quietly known all along. This connection refused to let go because it had already become part of who they were. It wasn't holding them captive. It was shaping them into someone capable of understanding love, patience, forgiveness, and truth in ways they had never experienced before. That realization transformed everything. Suddenly, the waiting no longer looked meaningless. The distance no longer felt like punishment. Even the unanswered questions began revealing lessons that had remained hidden beneath the surface. They started seeing that every obstacle had strengthened something within them instead of destroying it. Every delay had developed greater maturity. Every season of silence had taught them how to listen to their own heart instead of allowing fear to make every important decision. Looking back, they understood that this journey had never been about losing each other. It had always been about discovering themselves before they could fully appreciate what this connection truly represented. The person who exposed the hidden reason explained that some bonds continue existing because their purpose extends beyond a single chapter. They continue growing quietly until both people are emotionally prepared to recognize what they once overlooked. Those words echoed through their mind because they explained something they had struggled to understand for years. They realized they had spent so much energy trying to protect themselves from disappointment that they never stopped to consider how much they were also protecting themselves from happiness. Fear had convinced them that walking away would make life easier. Silence had promised peace. Distance had seemed like the safest solution. Yet none of those choices had created the freedom they hoped for. Instead, they carried the same emotions into every new season, the same unanswered questions into every quiet night, and the same memories into every attempt to move forward. That was the moment they finally recognized the difference between escaping a situation and healing from it. Escaping only changes the scenery. Healing changes the heart, and their heart was now asking for something it had been denied for far too long. Honesty. Not perfect answers, not guaranteed outcomes. Simply honesty. They began admitting truths they had never spoken aloud, even to themselves. They admitted that certain memories still mattered. They admitted that certain moments continued bringing unexpected emotion. Most importantly, they admitted that this connection had never truly disappeared because they had never truly allowed themselves to understand its purpose. As each day passed, the emotional weight they had carried slowly transformed into clarity. They no longer viewed vulnerability as weakness. They no longer believed silence was strength. Instead, they discovered that real strength often begins the moment a person stops running from what they genuinely feel. And with that understanding came an unmistakable sense of urgency. Not the urgency created by fear, but the urgency created by readiness. They could feel that life was gently leading them toward a crossroads, where pretending would no longer be possible. Every lesson had prepared them for this moment. Every memory had quietly guided them here. Every season of waiting had been building toward a single realization that now stood directly before them. The connection had never refused to let go because it was trying to hold them back. It refused to let go because its purpose had not yet been fulfilled. There was still truth waiting to be spoken. There was still understanding waiting to be shared. There was still a chapter that neither heart had fully written. And as that realization settled deeply within them, they understood that the final step ahead would not require perfect circumstances or complete certainty. It would require something far greater, the courage to trust what had quietly remained true through every season of change, every moment of silence, and every attempt to believe that this story had already come to an end. And now, stay with me, because this is the moment everything has been leading toward from the very beginning. After all the waiting, all the unanswered questions, all the memories that refused to fade, and all the emotions that quietly remained beneath the surface, the hidden reason has finally been exposed. It was never about a missed opportunity. It was never about bad timing. It was never because one heart cared more than the other. The truth is much deeper than anyone expected. This connection never truly ended because its purpose was never fully completed. Every season of silence carried a lesson. Every moment of distance created growth that neither of you could have experienced any other way. Even the painful chapters that once felt confusing were quietly preparing both hearts for a greater understanding of themselves and of each other. Looking back now, they realized that every disappointment taught resilience, every delay developed patience, and every unanswered question encouraged reflection that slowly transformed the person they were becoming. Without realizing it, they were changing from the inside out. They were learning to value honesty over comfort, courage over fear, and truth over the stories they had repeatedly told themselves. The person who uncovered this hidden reason helped them see something that changed everything. They explained that some connections are not measured by how often two people speak or how perfectly life unfolds. Instead, They are measured by what remains after everything else changes. Real connections leave fingerprints on the soul. They influence decisions long after conversations end. They shape perspectives without asking permission. They quietly become part of a person's journey in ways that cannot always be explained with logic alone. That understanding finally lifted the weight they had been carrying for so long. Instead of asking why this connection had never disappeared, they began asking what it had been trying to teach them all along. The answer slowly revealed itself. It had been teaching them to trust their own heart. For years, they searched for certainty in circumstances, for reassurance in other people's opinions, and for answers in places that could never truly satisfy the questions within them. Yet every path eventually guided them back to themselves. Every lesson pointed toward the same realization. Before they could fully understand this connection, they first needed to understand who they had become because of it. And that realization brought a peace they had not felt in a very long time. Suddenly, the past no longer felt like something to escape. It became something to appreciate. The memories no longer felt like burdens. They became reminders of growth. Even the silence took on a new meaning, because they understood that silence had never been empty. It had been quietly shaping wisdom, maturity, and emotional strength. The connection survived because both hearts were becoming people capable of seeing beyond appearances. They finally recognized that what seemed like an ending had actually been an invitation to grow individually before embracing a deeper truth together. As this understanding settled into their heart, another realization naturally followed. They no longer wanted to live according to fear. They no longer wanted to postpone honesty simply because uncertainty felt uncomfortable. They understood that waiting forever would never create perfect conditions. There would always be reasons to hesitate, reasons to doubt, reasons to remain silent. But they also understood something far more important. Every meaningful chapter in life begins the moment someone chooses authenticity over avoidance. That is the decision now standing before them. Not a decision built on pressure, but one built on clarity. Not a decision driven by desperation, but one inspired by peace. They finally know that this connection deserves honesty, because honesty is the only foundation strong enough to carry something that has already survived so much. And perhaps that is the greatest truth someone could have exposed. This journey was never about proving whether the connection existed. It was about revealing why it endured when everything else changed. It endured because it awakened growth. It endured because it inspired transformation. It endured because neither heart was meant to remain the person they were when this story first began. Now, standing at the threshold of a brand new chapter, they are no longer asking whether the connection is real. They are no longer questioning whether it mattered. Those answers have already become undeniable. The only thing that remains is the courage to move forward with the wisdom this journey has given them. Whatever happens next, one truth can never be taken away. Someone finally exposed the hidden reason this connection never truly ended, and now the truth can no longer be hidden again. It has become part of the story, part of the healing, and part of the future that is quietly beginning to unfold, one honest step at a time.